Here's the thing to remember. There were meetings definitely where Dr. Kelly was not present, and there was belligerence, and there was an insistence on, raising of topics that were not even on the agenda of the day. An example might be Prince Harry decides on a specific occasion that he wants to appoint an individual to the board with immediate effect without having talked to me. It's not on the agenda, and somehow everybody's just supposed to tolerate that.
The he being here, Prince Harry?
Yes, Prince
So Prince Harry comes into the meeting and says, I want to appoint somebody as CEO.
As a board member, as a trustee with immediate effect. His proxy on the board says, yes, I second that motion. The third proxy on the board says, welcome to the board, Brian. And everybody's shocked and quiet. But this is what happens when the prince is in the room and no one has the courage to speak.
Well, speaking of not having the courage to speak, another trustee, Baroness Chalker of Wallasey, served as a trustee for 20 years, described you as, I'm quoting here, almost dictatorial.
Change is hard for some people. Let me just put it that way. I think what we had here was a board that had overstayed by even Charity Commission guidance. Most of the members of the board, when I came back in July of 2023, had been on the board when I left. This is not how a properly run organization should work. You're not supposed to be on a board for past 9 years. Most of these individuals were there for 5, 10, 15, now 19 years. And so what you have is entrenchment. And there's a reason why you have term limits, because people begin to mark their own homework. And turkeys don't vote for Christmas. And so here I come talking about transformation and innovation and fresh ideas. What do you think the response might be?
Chase, what do you got?
If I'm looking at any royal family issue or any other issue that involves these elites, there's one thing these people learn extremely quickly to weaponize and distort. So in my mind, it's one of the most reliable things you can look at when you're observing drama like playing out on the news, which is not healthy, and I don't recommend it. But it's metaphor, parable, and allegory. Those three things. So really quickly, let's talk about why metaphors work. Metaphors bypass logic and go straight to this emotional part of our brain, the more mammalian part of our brain, because they're visual. They're sticky and memorable, if we can get them across, and they frame our perception without needing any kind of proof. Without needing proof. So they make these little frames in our head that seriously influence how we see someone or something, like putting a filter over a lens. And just on the surface of this, it might sound deep or thoughtful, but it's just a sneaky way to get people emotionally bought in without offering any real evidence at all. So the way that they kind of become weapons, like instead of saying what the person did, they'll say what the person is like. So like they might say a phrase like, he's like a cancer in the company, slowly eating away at everything good. No need to back that up. Just drop a metaphor like that, and everybody starts looking at the guy sideways. And so it's like a psychological graffiti. You paint over somebody's character in one sentence. And the second way that deceptive people use this is they make themselves the hero. You hear these CEOs and stuff out there say like, oh, we're just trying to be the lighthouse in the storm here. All we're doing is trying to protect the sheep from the wolf. They're not just these little poetic things. These are calculated. It's about creating a moral contrast. We are the light, they are the darkness. No nuance whatsoever, just clean-cut manipulation. And the metaphor replaces evidence in so many cases, even in the courtroom, when courtroom stuff plays out. Once they set the frame like snake, virus, wolf, whatever, everything that person does afterward gets filtered through that lens. And all of a sudden, all these neutral behaviors look a little bit shady. These tiny little flaws seem a little bit dangerous. So here's how to know when it's absolute bullshit. Number one, they use metaphors about people instead of topics. People telling the truth use metaphors to explain a bunch of complex stuff like politics is a chessboard. Character assassins use them to label somebody like he's a ticking time bomb. And it gets emotional very quickly. The goal is to stir the pot. So it makes people feel something really strong that they didn't realize there's no substance behind it. And I think the last point would be that there's no follow-up and there's no proof. They drop this big ass metaphor and then they nod like you're supposed to see it, but there's no real breakdown of facts. So truth telling uses metaphor to explain and to clarify systems, groups, and patterns, not to target an individual. They aim to increase understanding. They're backed by logic and data, not just some emotional appeal. The metaphor that you hear in this clip is truth-telling because it's systems, processes, and facts. And she can back it up the moment that she's asked about it, probably with facts. Greg, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I see congruent messaging. I see her delivering messaging with her body that her mouth is saying, and I'll point those out here in just a second. Let me give you a good example of what happens when people feel, and the reason I say it's always somewhere in the middle, when people feel a certain way. First Gulf War, I was in Kuwait. We were police and everything else at the end. This guy came in and told me that his daughter, who was a nurse, had been abused by this doctor. Well, allegations like that are big. And especially in the culture we're trying to reestablish. After digging in and interviewing these people, more than one person, we found his abuse was that he fired her because she refused to treat Iraqi prisoners. Now, imagine if you had not been able to dig through those feelings and all that stuff. To your point, Chase, abuse is a strong word. Well, we automatically assume the worst, and they go after that kind of thing. And this guy would have had somebody, and there's a bunch of tribalism involved, all kinds of stuff get involved when you are dealing with people. But when a person feels wronged, they're going to find the best way to make you feel the same wronging they felt. And in the case of it making it about the person, he's a monster, he's a this, he's a that. She doesn't say that. She goes into other ways of explaining, and I agree with you there. She navigates very carefully, and we always talk about eye movement on here, and I say you got to be really careful assigning anything to anything. And here's a great example of why. When she's looking down into her right, I don't think it's emotional accessing. I think you're asking her a question, and she is thinking through the right words to explain what's going on in her head. I don't think it's emotional. I think there could be some emotion in that, but she's very concise with what she's saying. She does that accessing. Her body is moving to illustrate to your point. Her body's moving to illustrate her points. That's congruent messaging. When I hit on my points, and Mark, I think in your case, where you talk about them hitting every syllable, it's awkward. This isn't that. Again, we're not talking about whether she's telling the truth as a flat fact, but what she perceives from her side. So I can only go there. She's got good 50-50 eye contact. And I say that about most Western cultures. We do 50-50. We'll talk, look at you, turn and think, look at you. Other cultures may be very different. And if you go to Asia, you'll see a lot less eye contact. If you go to the Middle East, you see a lot more eye contact. So when we say 50-50, remember it's culture and it's baseline. The only way to find out a real true eye movement pattern for a person is to ask questions. And they have to be very concise questions around accessing verbal memory, visual memory, auditory memory, visual memory, and those kinds of things. We're not seeing that, so we really can't build a pattern. But her hands come up to illustrate when she's talking about the model of the board and how things should operate. And then she is punctuating when she's indignant and closes her lips and throws her chin up when she's talking about that welcome to the board moment. If you want to know what's going on, this is where she feels like he violated an entitlement. And I don't mean that in the most modern slang version. I mean a true entitlement of the board by bypassing her authority, by bypassing the process and appointing de facto someone. And then there's an amused smile too when she gets to the point where she's challenged about being dictatorial. Look, I ran change management for big companies for a long time in the billions of dollars. You're always going to be perceived as something other than friendly when you're making change. It just is the way it is. So I can hear in her voice that doesn't mean that he didn't perceive her as sloppy or something else, and she perceived him as. So what I want you to see is her body language can punctuate truth in what she believes and thinks, and the truth can be something other than that. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about that smile. There is a detectable smile when Phillips calls out that Baroness Chalker of Wallasey suggested that she was dictatorial. Now, why might that be? Well, Baroness Chalker is a grand dame of politics, somebody who has been longer in politics than most others, held a lot of different offices, longer than anybody else, and would be seen as conservative establishment. And she was the conservative for African development. Now, African development isn't necessarily taking money into Africa. It's going into Africa and taking resources from Africa in exchange for their development. So she would be seen, Chalker would be seen as the establishment of the usual way of dealing with Africa, I would say. So I think the smile is one of, that is a formidable adversary to be chalked up as dictatorial against. That's a worthy opponent to have that said of you from. So I think she quite likes that. And I think that's what the smile would be about. Now, after that, to your point, Chase, about metaphors, we get lots of images and metaphors. In my view, look, you've got metaphors and similes. Similes is where you say something is like something. A metaphor is where you call something that it is not. And just as you say, Chase, it plays a lovely trick on the brain, because the brain forgets you were really talking about a simile. It thinks, it starts to see those images. So Chanduka here says that these former board members, Chalker of Wallasey being one of them, have been marking their own homework. So she makes them children. So she reduces them to children who are allowed to mark their own homework. She demotes them. And then she says, and the turkeys don't vote for Christmas. So now she makes them animals. Next demotion. In metaphor, what you're generally trying to do is either raise people towards the heavens or take them to the earth, and then take them below the earth where demons and the hot magma of the earth exists. So you've got escalating to the heavens or down into the depths of the caves. She makes them children, makes them turkeys that won't vote for their own destruction. Beautiful images there of establishment and change. And so a lovely hit she does there on Baroness Chalker of Wallasey and all, I would think, her type that she's thinking of the old establishment, of the old way of going into Africa for the British and how we deal with Africa. She's trying to change that at the moment. That's what she's in her mind and probably in actual fact up against. But beautiful communication there, and that lovely smile there of I think enjoying this idea that somebody at the level of Chalker has called her a dictator. There's some beauty in there somewhere. Scott, what do you got on this one?
All right. I think she knows exactly what she wants to say. Again, I don't think she sat around and thought about her answers and thought, I'll say this if they say that and all that. I think she's secure and confident with the information she has to be able to deliver it without the anger that by this time, normally I think somebody would be pretty upset. Normal people would be pretty upset. Again, I think she's so well spoken. She doesn't need to make things sound better than they are, bigger or more important than they are. So again, toward the end here, she starts using her illustrators. They're even bigger this time. So I think she's really trying to get that point across, the point she's making, trying to make sure that those are understood well. And it's not she's trying to look like she's getting all worked up. This is one of those people that when you argue with them, you got to be careful because they could just be livid and you'd never know it. So they're getting ready to pull out their best stuff, man, and to get you, and you wouldn't see it coming. And that's how they You know, it's like getting hit in the side of the head with a baseball bat from behind. That's when they start talking to you with their replies. That's what you get. So I think this is the part that frustrates her here at the end. And she understands the rules for a board and all that. I think she understands how all that works. I think she's a stickler for the details, you know? So I think somebody fighting her on that, which I think Harry doesn't understand all those things. He probably has a pretty good understanding of them. But I think she's a detailed, analytical person. So fussing with somebody over their job or whatever it is they've been assigned to do, that personality type, that's tough, especially if, and it sounds like to me, she's done everything she's supposed to do, it's kept everything in line. That's a tough fight there. So, I so far, I'm not seeing her be deceptive or anything. You know, I just see her ramping up. She's getting really frustrated. We're seeing a little bit of anger come in there to help move that along. All right. We good?
So here is here's the thing to remember. There were meetings definitely where Dr. Kelly was not present, and there was belligerence, and there was an insistence on, raising of topics that were not even on the agenda of the day. An example might be Prince Harry decides on a specific occasion that he wants to appoint an individual to the board with immediate effect without having talked to me. It's not on the agenda, and somehow everybody's just supposed to tolerate that.
The he being here, Prince Harry.
Yes, Prince.
So Prince Harry comes into the meeting and says, I want to appoint somebody as CEO.
As a board member, as a trustee with immediate effect. His proxy on the board says, yes, I second that motion. The third proxy on the board says, welcome to the board, Brian. And everybody's shocked and quiet. But this is what happens when the prince is in the room and no one has the courage to speak.
Well, speaking of not having the courage to speak, another trustee, Baroness Chalker of Wallasey, served as a trustee for 20 years, described you as, I'm quoting here, almost dictatorial.
Change is hard for some people. Let me just put it that way. I think what we had here was a board that had overstayed by even Charity Commission guidance. Most of the members of the board, when I came back in July of 2023, had been on the board when I left. This is not how a properly run organization should work. You're not supposed to be on a board for past 9 years. Most of these individuals were there for 5, 10, 15, now 19 years. And so what you have is entrenchment. And there's a reason why you have term limits, because people begin to mark their own homework, and turkeys don't vote for Christmas. And so here I come talking about transformation and innovation and fresh ideas. What do you think the response might be?
If you like this video, get the full body language breakdown and analysis on our main channel by clicking this video right here.